Okay, I'm thinking about a firefly kind of terrain, something where you might see some fireflies flying around. That would be kind of an environment that would be really conducive for gel pen highlights, additions, features. I really like using the gel pens dots with some of the pigment ink applications and really thin layers. It looks like glowing stars when you use it in the sky. It could be snowflakes falling down, or if you do it kind of just over a meadow or something like that, or in this case kind of maybe a seasonal wetlands or anything like that. I thought that would be kind of cool. You can do it in like a swampy area too, if you've ever gone on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland or Disney World or something like that. One of the really cool areas for me is just that opening feature when you're right in your vehicle, and you see the what is it, the little kind of bayou shack, right in the swamp there, and it's really dark, and they have those little suspended, I don't know, they didn't have LEDs back then, I don't know what it is, but that little light bulb, it looks like a little firefly kind of right in the calm waters, and it's one of the things that I always liked. It's before you even get into the ride itself, so very cool. Anyways, alright, so I'm just kind of creating a foundation for my other images to come. You can put whatever you want down there. It could be anything. And the one feature that we will kind of establish here is that we want this scene to be pretty dark, because we want there to be a lot of contrast between those gel pen dots. If that's going to be the thing that's really featured in the piece, we have to make it as dark as we can without losing the imagery that we've established in the impressions here. So, chances are you want your things to show up, so we can't just make it black. If you want to, you can do something, another type of terrain, like working on a dark cardstock or something of that sort. That's one of those types of techniques that I really like doing too. And those types of stocks really bring out lighter gel pen touches, and would work really well for this type of thing. But one of the things about starting with an established colored background is that it doesn't leave quite as much room for variation as we get when we're working on just a white piece of paper. It's an open canvas for whatever type of color schemes, shading schemes we want to employ within the piece. So working with a dark blue cardstock, you're not going to have a reflective type of yellow down there or something. Anything that you want to do, basically. It certainly is faster though, and it has a different look, and it has its own character to that, but you just don't have the variation. Okay, so right now I've established a couple impressions with the pawn stamp, and I've filled in around it with the Sedge filler. And then we've established the base, the bottom areas of the Mossy trunks here. And I'm going to stamp this one up here. This is the smaller version of it, so usually things that are smaller and represent something farther back in the distance, I stamp them higher up in the scene, and that's kind of a Western sensibility of distance when it comes to landscapes. There's other styles and other kind of like Eastern styles and whatnot. I heard that kind of the location of an object or within that theme, I guess, represents the time or something like that. So there could be something that's representative of you know, earlier time. Actually, that one looks like it's in front of it now. I can kind of bring that trunk down here, or maybe it's just a smaller grouping of trunks there. Okay, I was going to stamp another one right in here, but I think I'm going to leave it as is. I think I might put something in there. It seems like a good kind of peekaboo area there for something else. Maybe a moon or something of that sort. Yeah, I think that would be good. Moonlight with fireflies. Any type of sky figure in there would look really great. Alright, so let me go grab something like that. The scene is evolving. I don't have really a perfectly set idea in mind when I start something like this, so I'm not really quite sure until I get it. Alright, I think we'll go with a cloud. Kind of back there on the horizon. And I thought this moon would really look good right back on that space right there. I'm just going to make this nice and easy, and I'm going to stamp this in black. I don't always do that. Usually, I think it's going to have a kind of a bluish tinge to this scene, but going with these fireflies, I really want those fireflies to stand out, so I'm going to establish my sky figures in a nice dark value. And I say that I'm going dark this time because a lot of times what I'll do is, if there's going to be a certain color scheme in here, I usually establish my light source, in this case the moon, in that color scheme. So if it's casting a blue light, chances are it would be blue itself. But I'm just going to go with that. Oops, I didn't stamp right there. See, sometimes when you have this right here, even as thin as it is raised, so I didn't put enough pressure right there, so all I need to do, it's no big deal, you just go back in with some additional tone or texture right here, not tone, but texture, and I'll just restamp that right over the top of it. If you're stamping on a platform or something like that, you can just use that. So I'll just come right in here like so, and let me see, did I ink up that side? Sometimes I can't remember what side I inked up. Okay, and we'll just lay that right in there, and no big deal. Everything has been made to overlap and layer, hopefully as seamlessly as possible. And we have this area down below. I think I'm going to establish this cloud down here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe off the edges right here. And it's a pretty good habit to get into if you're using this cloud. Just really dampen it off. See, I went in about a ½ inch or so around the perimeter like this. And if you don't want that cloud to be so black like that, in this case, I mean, I'm going pretty dark with it, so that's as dark as you can get with black. And anyways, when you kind of mop off the edges like that, it will stamp out drier on the perimeter and thus lighter. And then when it's merging into something else, any perimeter designs that you're kind of merging it with, it'll merge in nice and gracefully, like so. All right. Okay, so the question is, do I want some additional textures out here? I think I do, and I'm just going to stamp it right over those trees, and I'm going to go for another impression of it, like that. Okay, I just want a little bit of texture in there, like right in there. And stamping it up fairly light, kind of in the second impression, kind of gives me that impression back there. Now the tree trunks are going to get darker because they're going to be in shadow, so I'm not worried about this cloud going into those trees. I don't want a really super strong impression of it. That's why I kind of went with a second impression, so I'll blot that out once right here, because that's what I did here. Wipe off the edges, again, about a ½ inch, ¼ inch or so, and take off a good amount with a dry paper towel. Okay, and then let's just get another one right in here, like so. Okay, I mean, you can even come over here if you want to. I don't know if I'll be able to see those clouds out there because I intend on making the scene fairly dark and saturated in different values out there. So, but it establishes kind of a foundation texture, and I don't know, it kind of gets us on our way as far as the general kind of textural theme of the scene, even though we might not I don't have a lot of clean stylus tools here. I'm testing my stylus tools for to see what colors are on there. Let me see if I can find a blue one. Okay, this one's clean right here. This one actually is ripped right here. This one's a really quite old one. I can tell because the sponge here is a little bit of a different consistency from some of the latter years of like a stylus tool construction from Clear Snap. They've changed their sponge tips over time. The material that they're using. Okay, so anyway, okay, so this is how I look at a scene for lighting. Okay, this is backlit. Okay, the things that are right in here are going to be backlit because we have the moon back there, right? Makes sense? So these objects in here, something that's being backlit is often in silhouette, especially if it's this type of time of day right here. It's going to be nighttime, so these are going to be very dark. So I'm thinking dark tree trunks right here and casting a shadow down here, okay? And what are the things that are the most reflective of light? Well, this could be water down here, and I'm thinking the water down here could be lighter. So we have all these trunks dark and darker underneath and lighter in here, so in terms of the pond and lighter clouds right here, right? Reflecting that moonlight. Okay, so let's get into it here. I'm just going to establish kind of a general lighting scheme, okay? Right here. And why don't we just go with, you can go with anything, any light color. I'm just going to go with what I feel is a pretty neutral gray here. It's not a warm gray or a cool gray, although you could do either. But I'm just going to start with this Memento. Now, you know what? I have this Memento London Fog in the re-inker form, re-inker incarnation, somewhere here. Lulu Lavender, London Fog, here we go. Alright, now this is a half-page scene, so it's fairly large as far as scenes go. I'm going to take a little bit of this ink right here. Actually, I just dripped it into a my palette there that had some blue, so it might come out looking a little bit bluish. And no big deal, because the scene itself is going to be fairly blue later on. Okay, now I'm just sopping it up in my applicator right here. Whatever kind of sponge applicator you're using will be fine. And it gets it good and sopping wet. So, ooh, that is really quite dark. I think it looked like I had some black in here too. Alright, so be it. Let's start off with this. I already have it in there, I don't want to waste it. Okay. It is going to get fairly dark in here, it's just I'm starting pretty dark right here. Darker than I thought I would. So I'm going to lay this down in the shadow areas first, okay, and I often like a darker perimeter. Okay, here we go. I have less ink in here, so it's applying lighter. It's kind of precarious. Start much lighter than this for you. Okay. Adding this down like so. Alright, now my clouds are going to be reflecting that light as well, so I'm going to be careful to not tone them all out. Okay, now the area around my moon I'm going to make pretty dark, okay? But I'll have that moonlight reflecting off some of those clouds, so all you have to do is just not tone them out, okay? Things that you want light as your light source, keep light. The things that you want reflecting your light, keep light, right? And just tone around them. Sometimes it's, it takes a little time, I know, to kind of get the feel of what you would leave light in terms of lighting schemes, okay? But here's my really kind of easy concept, okay? Now in application, it's different for every scene, of course, depending on what you have in here. But generally, we have an area of light up here, okay? Like this. And then we kind of darken the area in between the light source and reflected light, okay? So we have this area that's getting dark right in here, and then we have the light reflecting back. So here's an area of light, it goes dark. Now I have this cloud up here, so it goes, I have an added thing that's a little bit light, but generally it's pretty light in here. So we have light, okay, dark, light. Just two areas, okay, like that. Split. So it looks kind of like this 8 or something like that. And that's just a really general concept there as far as what you can think about when you're doing it. Naturally, you might have other things that you want illuminated, and if you're going to stamp a bear over here and a deer over here, then you might want to leave those areas light, lighter. Okay, now in this area right here, this is just a general area of light. I'm going to color in things that aren't, the water a little bit, okay? And there's clouds over here, but these ones are closer to it, so I left those light. Over here, I just toned them out, okay? Because I really want to have kind of a strong lighting scheme established in this piece. Okay, so kind of makes sense there. Light, dark, light. And I have a video just dedicated to that dynamic there. And it's a really simplistic one, but if you're getting started and you have all you have to think about. Here's one right here that I just did last night. We go light, right, in the sky, dark, and light down here. The only thing is I went dark and light. I split this up into two areas, so I went light, dark, light, dark, light. All right? It's really simplistic, but it works. That's what I do on most of my pieces. All right, now in a scene like this, I could go with some other types of colors in here, and I think I might, but it's generally going to be kind of in the bluish tinge. Okay, so just working a little bit darker, I'm going into my next tone right here. This is a salvia blue. Some other colors that you might be a little bit more familiar with, why don't we use that? Tumbled glass, distress ink. A lot of people are more familiar with distress ink colors, so or the range. So let's use some of this, maybe and the Marvy, I don't know. I'm just using the same tip right here, so it'll be some incarnation between the London fog and whatever was in this tip and this tumbled glass, okay? And where do you add this? You can add it in roughly the same areas that you did with your previous color, and don't forget to retain the light areas that you've established with your first color, okay? So in other words, a lot of people get this down. They get the toning process down and they get more comfortable with it, and so sometimes they start applying their darker colors a little bit too fast, and they kind of go over too much of their piece where they've established their lighter areas by just toning them out, and then suddenly they don't have any lighting scheme anymore because everything has been toned out. Okay, so kind of get the feel of this piece. It's coming together pretty fast, and that's just with my first two colors. I plan on going through kind of a wider spectrum in here, a wider range of hue and value, but it's not too bad right now. We can leave it as this, and I think that would be a pretty nice established lighting scheme in here, right? It kind of looks more mellow now, right? The more kind of colors you add into your piece. Alright, I'm going to add some salvia blue. I don't know how I got that ink there. It happened early on, but I want to use quite a lot of ink, so I do have the pad for that, so I'm going to use the pad. But if I just had the re-inker, and that's what I'm telling people these days, if you're not going to stamp something in a given color, okay, now Marvy doesn't sell their pads anymore. They sell blank pads that you can fill with their re-inker fluid, okay? They just don't sell the dedicated case anymore for their pads, you know, to a given color. So if you're not going to use a color to stamp an object and make impressions, but you might want that color to color a scene with like this, then you can just get the re-inker and use it as I did. Just dip it into something and go. And if it comes down to, do I get the pad and re-inker, or would I just rather get twice as many colors to work with? I typically, I don't know, my choice would be to opt for more colors, but just get the re-inker. And that's what I've bought a lot of re-inkers that I just don't have the pad for. Some of them I do. But, I don't know, space becomes an issue. Your money goes a long way in terms of your ink colors. If you just get the ink, there's more ink in a re-inker than there is in a brand new pad of that same color too. So there's that. Okay, so the darker we go here, the lighter the light areas are going to seem. Okay, now I want this to go a little bit moodier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come across the moon with a little bit of tone and just turn down the lightness of it. It's like turning down the visual volume a little bit. Okay, so it's a little bit toned down. It's a little bit mellower, okay? And I'll do the same for some of my reflections in there. I want this to kind of be really dark, and I don't want it to be creepy, but I want it to be kind of just more of a magical night or something like that. Alright, let's take a look at this. Mermaid Lagoon. A couple little dots in there. I didn't even squeeze any out. I just kind of tapped some out of the tip there. Alright, I'll take it up. Pretty dark right there in comparison to the rest, but that's because there's a big slathering of it, okay? Be careful when you move into your medium to darker tones, kind of stay on the perimeter a little bit longer, like this. See how I'm kind of staying out there a little bit longer? And it's because that was a little bit too much ink just to go all over the place with it, so I kind of just establish it a little bit and get a feel for it, how dark it's going to take my scene with the number of strokes that I'm using, and I'm using very light strokes and just touching the paper with this applicator and just streaking it on. If I want it to go darker, I don't squeeze more out. Well, sometimes I do if I want a ton of ink and it's just very light, but this one's a fairly dark tone in comparison to what I've already laid down there. Okay, see, I'm kind of hitting that area in there. I get more control out of this the drier it gets, but now it's getting pretty dry, so you can squeeze some of that color out and just kind of drag it in. Squeeze it out in your areas that are going to be dark, and then just spread it out. It's really easy to kind of drag out a puddle of that ink. Come across that moon again a little bit with this one. I'm coming across with a very dry application of this color. Okay, it's because I've used a lot. Remember, I only put a couple drops down there, so a couple drops goes a long way because I've established a lot of that ink on this paper, so I'm not going into a dry piece of paper. The paper keeps changing as we do this, because as we add more ink, the paper becomes a little bit more saturated with ink and moisture in the pulp of the paper, so that when I'm adding this, the feel of the applications becomes a little bit different, because we're kind of adding it to a different surface than we started with. It's still the same piece of paper, right? But it gets wetter and wetter. So you have to kind of be aware of that and feel it a little bit as you're adding it down there. All right, now I want to change things up a little bit. Well, not change things, but tweak them a little bit. I like this Caribbean blue. It's a little bit of a warmer blue, and I think even though we wouldn't see green, different hue at nighttime, this is our scene, so we can do anything we want to it. The laws of kind of nature and color and whatnot don't have to apply. All right, now, I mean, I'm not doing it right now, but the thing that I'm going to get to, I want to get a little bit of greenish kind of tinge down in this grassy area, just to kind of change things up a little bit and to create a little bit more variation. So why don't we go with something like this green right here. This is called pale green right here. Let me get some of this blue out of here. I think I'm going to use the same tip. Unless I have a clean tip here. Yeah, that one's dirty. Okay. I should have cleaned my tips up. I thought I had some clean tips here, but I didn't. Or what's on this side? That one's a violet or something. I should clean my tips more often. It only takes a minute. I just run them underneath the sink. Okay, yeah, here it comes. Isn't that pale green in there? It doesn't look just straight pale green because we're adding it over the top of blue, but look at that glow kind of coming out now. Isn't that fun? Analogous colors on the color wheel, colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel, when you place them next to one another, create a color glow. So green over the top of blue creates a color glow like that. All right? It's not putting it side by side, but overlapping it does the same thing. All right, so this is going into much more of a earthy greenish tinge, yellow-green, but let's try that. I always try it in a small area and see if I like it. And it's kind of some fusion of the pale green, because it's still in this one, but I want this to be kind of a, I don't know, mystical fairyland type of terrain. Those little fireflies could represent, I don't know, like little fairies or something like that in the sky. And I really like that type of whimsical look for some pieces. So anyways, when you add a little bit of warmth like that, doesn't it look a little bit more inviting too, and friendly? When you add that temperature to a piece, it's not so cold and kind of I wouldn't say uninviting there, but I don't know, it's just different. All right, this is a blue here. This is the Marby number 10 blue. Sometimes this is the type of blue that I recommend that people add into the mix when they're doing landscape stamping. It's a really quite bright blue. I would recommend adding in some component of brightness, okay, within each color scheme. So you can go with any blues from any other company, get those, but at least have one Marby color of that family of colors within their kind of supplies, their repertoire of, inks or whatever. And that's because you can go brighter, I mean, you can go duller with a really bright tone. Let's see, this is a really bright blue right here if I add it in its entirety, but I can go dull with it by just doing a lighter version of it, you know, a softer version, but you can't necessarily take a dull color. And dull, I don't mean uninteresting, okay? I like having a nice range of really bright to dull in terms of intensity. But you can't necessarily make the dull bright, okay? So I like having that ability of adding something really saturated into the mix. Okay, now I'm just kind of adding some tone to my trees here. I am just adding it at an angle. I have my tool at an angle, like so. Making my tree trunks a little bit darker. And then we'll add more down by the shadows. Can I see those trees kind of getting a little bit more mass? It's not very apparent right now because it's just a little bit darker than the background, which the background I'm going to make darker too, but when you establish some shadows at the base of objects, you're giving those objects mass, and you're saying that they're not see-through, they're opaque, and they have kind of a visual weight to them. But mostly that idea of opacity. They have to be able to cast shadows, otherwise you have the light shining right through them. I'll make this pond a little bit darker because we have these trees right here. Okay. Alright, should we get a little bit, I don't know, more bold with our green tinge? Let's try it. Let me see if I can find an ink that I'd want. This one has a little bit of brown in it. I did some greens last night for a piece, so I know my applicator with green is somewhere around here, unless it went all the way to black, and I went from green to black. All right, this is just brown. I'm just going to use that one. Bamboo leaves, memento. It doesn't matter what green, it's not. This isn't like science, okay? Like, exact color schemes, okay? I'm just working kind of in generals, okay? So, I don't want to go too much darker than the color that I'm already using, so I usually like to take things kind of in a incremental method. So if you just take things a little bit darker, it almost doesn't even matter what color you're using, because your values aren't taking such a huge jump. All right, so just little by little, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, okay? So this is called, these trees are called mossy covered mossy tree trunks, so I'm just going in and adding some of that green to them, which is fine. They're kind of covered, that this base of the trunks there are kind of the type that might be covered in green from a perhaps a rainforest or something like that. But it doesn't matter though. I'm just trying to make something that looks cool, not that is realistic, so to speak. Alright, so there we have that. But green's looking pretty good down there, I think. Establishing that kind of warm hue. It changes things a little bit too when you have two different color schemes, but I mean the lighting scheme is still the same. This area down here is getting a little bit more ribbon thin in terms of my reflected light, but you basically have light up there, and then light down here again, right? And divided by that area of, it doesn't have to be super dark, but just some kind of division of it so that the whole thing isn't just one big area in the middle of light. Alright, this is a cottage ivy, going a little bit darker with my green. And let's watch these areas in here get a little bit darker with the shadows. It's going to be a lot of fun adding in those little firefly features in the piece. Alright, I'm getting a little bit real greenish down there just from the amount of green that's been used in relation to the blues. And so, a lot of times what I like to do is I like to mellow that out a little bit and make it a little bit more earthy in spirit. So I'm going to try something like this antique linen, kind of a brownish tinge, okay? And I might just add it in with that green that's in there. So let's take some of this. That's one of my tricks. In grassy areas, typically I'll use some sort of brown, okay? You don't have to go with a dark brown, just go with some sort of color in that family, so like beige or something like that, right? So it looks something like that. It's a little bit of a dirtier green now. And it just kind of mellows out the kind of that super brightness of a green, or a green layers. Okay, now this isn't doing it for me, so I'm going to use more. So you just keep building it up. I mean, it looks okay, but it's just not there yet. Alright, so I am going to go with the brown. Let's go with this brown right here. This is a Marvy number 6 brown. It's just called brown. Alright, let me take the color out of this right here. Okay. Alright. Kind of turns it a little bit more. Brown plus that green turns a little bit more into like an olive green. So it's a little bit more of a, well, I don't know, I keep saying it, like earthy in terms of the color. So maybe a touch more just realistic in terms of just the variation that you would see within a given space with grass. Okay, it kind of grounds it a little bit more like that, instead of like a really hot green. Okay, here's a dark brown. Let's try this. Let's put this brown in the shadows. Okay, I'll go all the way to black, but I'm working it through colors that are colors and values that are lighter first, and black may cover them up later to a good degree, but it'll be a much richer black as a result of having these undertones, because even black is going to be dye-based inks in general are transparent, and black is no exception. It's just a much darker tone, so it's not going to be just completely opaque or just so dark that you can't see through it. Okay, so see, this where I'm kind of adding these shadows. Doesn't it look like they're getting anchored into the scene a little bit more when you look at the overall? So shadows are those things that are often kind of they're underrated. That's the word I'm looking for. They're underrated as far as their importance potential importance within a given piece. It gives everything visual weight. It adds additional value to a piece, so you have a much wider value range. You can establish distance, you know, how dark do you do a shadow? Maybe the ones in the foreground are much darker, and the ones in the background they're more distant. The shadows are lighter, because just in general, things in the foregrounds are darker anyway. Okay, now one of the things I'm starting to establish here is I'm kind of putting a shadow on the side of the tree that's the farthest away from the light source. So in this case, I'm putting the shadow on the right-hand side of these trunks just by tipping this and going like this, up and down, and I'm doing it just on one side of the trunk. The tree trunk's on the other side of the scene. I'll put the shadow on the opposite side. I'll put it on the left-hand side. Alright, so there we go. See that? Those tree trunks. See how I've added the tone on the right-hand side of them? Now, they look like they're being affected by that moonlight. Now look at these on this side, where I didn't do anything. They don't have as much weight to them, do they? It's just, you can see the blues right through it. Okay, so let's do the same thing on this side. And again, just working with the dark brown for right now. I mean, if you didn't have a dark brown, you can go and just straight and do this with black too. Or if your brown isn't dark enough. This one happens to be the number 18 dark brown from Marvy. And it's pretty dark. It's one of my favorite colors. This and their brown. And naturally, when you're doing landscape stamping, you don't always have to stamp in, you know, your earthy colors, blues, browns, greens, but I do use them quite a bit. And even though this one isn't being used as a brown, it's just kind of being used as a darker tone, a darker value, it's still perfect for this application of it. Okay, let's bring some of this down into the trunks as well, and down into the grass right at the base of the trunks for that shadow grounding darkness. Okay. Alright, I think those trees are pretty established in there. I find I want to go a little bit darker here, though. Okay, a lot of times I like a nice vignette in my pieces, so I will add some darker tones in the four corners of the piece. And remember, I still have black that I can use, so we can kind of turn it up a notch, as you might say. about the colors, but look at that strong vignette. Look at that lighting now. All right, so let's see. Let's take a look at, go back to that sky now. That sky can use a little bit more of a value change. The same thing that's going on down here. This area is so rich that this area back in here looks a little bit anemic now. Excuse me, in comparison. So I'm going with that vignette up here. And I'm just going with a darker blue than what I used originally. That area up there is getting a little bit dry because I haven't added any color up there in a while. So just be careful that you don't kind of tear your tips here. Be very careful with them if you're using this tool here. Remember, you don't need to use this tool. This was the tool that I used, the other day just as a sponging tool, and I just dragged in some color. Or tapped and dragged, whatever. Alright, that was a number 3 blue. It's pretty dark, but let's go back to, or did I use it before? The Prussian blue. Prussian blue, Marvies. That's another blue that I really like, and I recommend in people's repertoire. Sometimes you just want to go a little bit darker, and sometimes it's hard to establish that with some other blues, as dark as they may seem on the, like a pad case or something like that. Blueprint Sketch is pretty dark, though. From Distress, I really like that one, too. It's a little bit different in terms of the blue. It really does look like the Blueprint color, so there's a touch of, like, red in it, for a tinge of slight violet, maybe? See what this does? Kind of going a little bit darker, or a lot darker, around on the perimeter. Tends to contain the piece a little bit more. Kind of focuses the viewer's eye or attention into the scene a little bit more. All right, now we have these kind of streaks going back in here in the design, right, of that moon. So I think following that spirit of those striations like that is something that we can do in the coloring of this. Okay, now this blue there is really dry, so I'm going to reestablish some moisture content within that area. So I'm just taking a little bit of this tumbled glass again, our lightest, one of our lightest colors, and I'm just going to reestablish some of this. Be careful that you don't tone out, all of your light going in here now or something like that at this point in time. But I'm just kind of bringing some of this back in to the mix. It doesn't make things lighter, it just kind of moistens the surface once again, because I want to do these streaky applications of color in the area that I'm kind of reestablishing the moisture content. Okay. Alright, so let's go to this Prussian blue. Now I have some of that tumbled glass in this tip. I'm going to use the same tip here, so let's see if I can get anything going. Sometimes there's so much of the previous color that we can't really see it. Yeah, that looks okay. Can't really see it too much, but I'll have to kind of work it a while, to get that tumbled glass out of there. Okay, you can bring it down in the shadows as well. Yeah, it's blue, but it creates a unity of color, a unity of tone throughout the piece. It doesn't read as blue at all over the top of things, but kind of just lends itself to the shadow area, the shadow feel. Okay, going out here a little bit darker. Everything looks a little bit richer and richer. I guess in terms of the values, I guess the colors too. The saturation becomes a little more, distinct as we add on to it. Let's go all the way to black now. Now we're kind of, we've returned to the same color that we stamped our impressions in. I'm using the same tip. I do have some blues in there, so it'll be some version of blue and black for a while as I start applying this, but then as I keep dabbing into this and going in here, it becomes more and more of the straight black. So see what I mean? If you use the same tip, it creates those transitions for you between one color that you're using and then going into the next, because it's some version in between. And here, for me, I can see it's starting to get darker and darker as I apply this, and for me it's the color that is going to start kind of bringing things together. It may be more of a grayish tinge, because I'm not stamping something out in it, but it is the same color. So whatever your darkest color that you use, probably within the impressions, usually people, if they're stamping something out, they're often doing it in black. So black would be the thing in terms of the toning process to tie it all together. And the reason being is, let's say I stamped that cloud in black, right? You're saying that the shadows in that are black. So going into the scene and establishing shadows, you're doing those shadows in the same color. Yeah. So that being said, if I stamp something out, let's say the darkest things I stamp out are dark blue or something of that sort, winter tone scene or something of that nature, I may not go to black in terms of the toning. I would go to that dark blue, which takes on its own kind of feel when you stamp out objects in colors as opposed to black. It has a different feel than stamping them in black. I really like what I see here. Kind of pouncing around. I'm not dragging and, scrubbing. Never scrub with your applicators, sponge applicators at least. It'll tear them. Okay. How does that look? Does that look good in terms of the terrain, the shadows, the anchoring of form, I guess you can say. What else is going on in here? Glowing saturations of color. Colors underneath the surface are the things that are establishing that real rich color glow within those spaces. Okay, now we're going with black. I can establish a little bit of darker shadows on these trunks. I don't know if I'll go all the way up the trunk all the way up top. Sometimes I just do it towards the bottom to make the images seem a little bit more bottom heavy and anchored. You just kind of have to observe. Things don't have to be of a given process or rule by any means. I mean, remember this scene, to me, I thought looked pretty good, even with just two colors that we've established on there. It was the London fog and another blue. And that had its own feel to it, its own visual characteristic. But it still had lighting. It had a little bit of temperature from using the blue. But yeah, the lighting scheme was well established right from the get-go. I just wanted this to go darker, for one, so it'd have a little bit more of a sophisticated color range and textural range as well. Alright. I'm turning down the light, I think, in this piece. I can see it happening right before my eyes. So it takes on a little bit of a different feel as we do that. And it happens just gradually, which is what I want, because I have a lot more control over it than if I was just doing something really fast. It would be more of a precarious exercise. So even though this is black right here, it's adding that black right there. See how light it is? So this is straight out of the pad, and if you don't squeeze it out, I'm not going like that. So sometimes when people want things to get darker, they do that, and they think, oh my god, I'm getting oval shapes everywhere. It's because they're printing shapes on there, as opposed to just going with a much lighter touch and doing things in a more gradual fashion. Okay, so you see that? You can get these nice tapered applications of it from light to dark. The darker areas are just more taps. It's not stronger taps, okay? And then getting that edge in there. All right? So you just have to kind of get a feel for it. I don't know if it's probably a little bit, harder, but I always say, just imagine you're applying like makeup to a child's face, okay? It doesn't have to be a 1-year-old or a baby, but maybe like a toddler or something, just imagine you're dabbing some on there, or maybe you can do a little bit stronger, if they're 11 or something like that. They're ready to go out to Halloween or something like that, okay? But just not scrubbing on it. You wouldn't scrub something on, someone's skin. All right, that looks pretty good in terms of our shadows, I would say. Isn't that fun? Oh, so I established that tumbled glass. That's what it was in that area. This paper is really drying fast on me. It is so hot these days where I am. It's humid too, but I can just tell my inks are drying so much faster than they normally do. So anyways, I was wanting to go in here and add some of those streaks, just like that moon. And let me see if I can get some of it down here. And vary that background application of ink a little bit by doing these striations. Okay, so I'm carrying the texture of the design out into the rest of the piece. It doesn't have to be real obvious, it can be subtle, but I still want that element within this given space. Okay, so there we go, like that. See that little streak over there? Because that moon in there is a little bit streaky. Alright, one of the things that's kind of bothering me here is I felt that cloud is a little bit too light, so let's tone it out. I am using black, but I'm just using it in a dabbing motion, so it's applying more of a grayish tinge to it. Alright, so that toned that cloud out a touch. Alright, now, this piece looks pretty good to me, but I want to establish more habitat. I'm just trying to look for the word in my brain. Habitat. I want to establish more of a habitat for things like fireflies, things that they can land on and whatnot that aren't on the ground. Okay. So let's start adding some additional foliage into the scene. Okay. Now I don't know if I want that whole reed in here. I might want just some grass, and I like adding it quite often at the base of my trees. Okay. I think it's another thing that can kind of anchor those objects into the ground. That and shadows. Shadows are kind of a visual anchor. This is kind of a visual but textural anchor. So now it's kind of adding a more varied surface as well. I'm just changing the height of this mask as well as I'm doing this. I did this design just so where you can add it in profusion if you want, but it won't look like a Brillo pad. Sometimes some designs that I've seen out there, they didn't kind of establish the ratio of things so that if they use it in repetition, it looks like, I don't know, like a steel wool or something of that sort. So kind of change the angle, and that's why I changed the height of it too, to kind of take on a more kind of graceful look where it's not covering up things in the background either, and where it won't look like the same type of thing. Also, don't put too much pressure on the tip of this right here. Otherwise it'll look like that with a, you know, kind of a fatter tip right there. So just light, even pressure, okay? And I have a video on stamp impression pressure too. Sometimes some of the videos go into a bit of the minutia of stamping, but yet I absolutely know what's happening out there and why it's happening. It's completely understandable. Because I did it too sometimes if I get impatient. Okay. Let's see if I can stamp out some additional textures in this piece. This is just called Tiny Rocks right here. I love texture in the scenes. All of this work for a few fireflies. It'll pay off though. It's so much fun. Alright, so we see those different textures that are running down here. Everything's kind of unifying things a little bit more too, don't you think? With the use of universal textures going across, or universal form and impressions. Then we have those rocks down in this general area. So it's serving to bring continuity into the piece. Alright, now I think I'll go with some additional larger form impressions in the foreground here. And I'm looking for my larger reed stamp. It's somewhere around here. I'm going to pause this video because I think I have something that I want to put right in here as well. Oh, actually maybe here I found my stamp. I've been doing so much stamping of late. My desk here is cluttered with stamps. I don't want to take the time to just to clean them all off and re-categorize them. My categorization isn't real particular, though. I just kind of put my stamps in. These wood stamps, one of them's sky figures, one of them's trees. Then I have a few others, tropical and, I don't know, mishmash, focal points, and I have all the people and things like that in another one, and animals in another. Alright, so anyways, establishing some additional textures down here. This textural form is larger than the background one. Working with scale like that creates separation in terms of distance, but also creates continuity in terms of form. You know, the same form working from front to back. Okay, so that is that. And I'll bring in some additional forms down here too. I plan on doing that with some much darker tones, but I'm going to save that till the end because that the VersaFine that I'll be using is quite dark. And I think this is a perfect opportunity for something in here. It's like a opening and it's a stage. We got the spotlight in there. So I think a little deer or something like that would be really fun in there, or something of the like done in silhouette. So I'm going to take a look and see what I might want to use in here. Okay, my little deer silhouette. I have a larger one too, which would change the feel of it, but I think I'll go for a little bit of a smaller one. Although that big one would be pretty dramatic in there against that moon. But I'll use the small one for now. Well, instead. Okay, just light, even pressure. Okay, isn't that a perfect space for a nice strong silhouetted object? It certainly creates a focal point in the scene, doesn't it? Doesn't it change the entire spirit of that area by having that creature in there? Okay, now we've established shadows, right? Throughout the piece. Well, actually, I might put that deer in some fog or mist. Mist in this scene would be something really cool and kind of ethereal. I might give this scene a little bit of time to set up in the wettest areas, like in the latest impressions right here in black. I won't have to have it set up for long, though, because it's just so hot out here. I think it's a 90-degree day, and I think it's 83 inside, so I don't know, we typically don't use our air conditioning during the day. Use fans. So anyway, I will let this set up for, I don't know, a few minutes. It won't take too long. Okay, I'm back about, I don't know, half an hour, maybe it's been 45. Well, maybe a little bit longer. The scene is nice and set up. Okay, now I'm going to layer some pigment ink impressions in here. But one of the things that's happened here too is some of those reeds and things in there. I need to kind of balance that out a little bit more with some additional tone. You know how I said usually go with whatever color you stamped your impressions in the toning process? Well, I'm going to do that and layer a little bit more tone down here, like so, just so that there isn't so much kind of a busy texture in there. Now, one of the things that we can do is we can also employ the ripped paper towel look, and see that will look really good right in there in terms of the grass, right? It has a ripped paper towel, has a similar texture to the tops of the sedge filler, so we can utilize that to our advantage. Simple ripped paper towel is a very easy but very effective method of toning with some, to get that nice variation in there. See that? And we can do that too across here. in some of the other areas as well. Just, it kind of, it fills it out a little bit. See that? Let's do it here in the foreground as well. You can bring some nice little variation. I'm barely tapping on the scene. I'm doing it mostly on this paper towel here, but I'm just getting a little bit, so I guess I can just color the tip of this too. See that little shadow in there? And how it's a little bit more varied. You get these shadows throughout without toning in a big area. Putting in a little bit of a shadow around the deer. I don't always do this paper towel thing, but I should. Or I should more often, because this is really effective. Quite effective. And it certainly is not a fussy thing to do. It's really easy to do. This is a little bit too light for me. I want more of a cast shadow in this area, I think. Like something like that, you know, so that that light is kind of coming in this way. I'm really quite pleased with this piece. I think it has a really great mood to it. And I think it even looks good without any of the gel pen touches that I'll be putting on it. But I think the gel pen touches will just kind of do that extra, will be that extra application that really kind of brings everything to life and really enhances the spirit, emphasizes kind of the mood that I'm going after. And one of the things I think this could use, all right, is a little bit more intensity in that green. So some of it will come out with the use of the spray that I'll spray it off with, but I think just in terms of the whimsy of everything and just, again, I keep going back to that word, the spirit of it. Let's go a little bit brighter down there. I think everything right now is kind of the same intensity. There isn't anything that's really standing out, okay, in terms of brightness. Everything's kind of mellow right now. And I do like that because that's the overall kind of mood of the piece, but I do want a little pop of something. Okay, so let's try to build it up. I'm taking out some of this brown out of this pad right here. I don't care if it's all taken out. It's fine if there's some in there, but let's go back to this. I don't even know if I used this before. Pear tart. I probably didn't, but let's add some of this in the shadows. I started off in the shadows because I want to see what it's going to look like, or get kind of an idea at least. See that little bit of intensity right there? It's subtle, but that's just kind of putting it in one area so far. Let's kind of add this around a little bit. Let's build it out. Okay, let's see if we can get some kind of this subsurface glow working over in this area. In the shadows, maybe? The shadows oftentimes have the brightest colors, okay? Because the colors aren't washed out by light. See that right there? It's pretty nice. That intensity kind of working in this area. It's still not quite there, though. Let's bump it up even more. Alright. The brightest colors on the market. Marvy. In terms of an overall kind of quality, there's individual colors that are brighter than the similar ones in, within the Marvy line. But just in general, they're very, very bright. Yeah. See that intensity? This is a very bright color. This is one of those colors that I recommend to people that are getting into landscape stamping, just because you can layer this underneath mellow green, so you can get the benefit of the brightness, but you can mellow it out with another color on top. So it has a bit of the kind of the deep intensity, but you can still mellow it out. But you can't necessarily make other duller colors more intense. So see that kind of glow working down in this area? That's what I'm going for in those areas, right in here. So let's really layer down a lot in the shadows. Let's bring some of this up into the trunk, I think. The mossy, maybe at least kind of towards the base of the trunks. You really try to make that moss come alive. In a very subtle way, though, not in a real obvious way. Okay, now this looks a little bit more saturated too because it's wet. When it dries, it'll take on a little bit of a different spirit, and then we spray it, and it'll all kind of come together in terms of the intensity range. All right, now I've added quite a bit of that. I really thought it could use a bit of a warming up in there. So I used quite a bit of that color, and let's do the same. Maybe in some of this water down here. So let me take out some of this color out of this other pad. Tip, stylus tool tip. Okay. Let's go with the 10. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go with that or something maybe a little darker. There we go. So isn't that kind of nice having that little bit of variation right there? See, I'll do the same thing right here. I'll bring it along the bottom portion of it, I think. Kind of takes on a little bit of different mood. I've decreased the amount of reflected light down there too by darkening it a little bit, and maybe that's more appropriate because it isn't super bright in this scene, or super lit, I guess, down there. Let's try it up in the sky as well. Let's go in this darker region and increase the saturation a touch. The saturation might still be there, it just looks dull right now from the use of the, or from the drying that's occurred. But the, like I said, the spray sealing will really increase the intensity of it. Really like my strong vignettes around the edge. Okay, this is going to be fun. I'm going to see if I can get a really strong lime. I think this one's not working for me, this Uniball Signo. But I want to get these firefly effects in here. But I'll also use some gel pen just for some highlighting effects and whatnot as well. We'll have some nice kind of sparkly, magical water down here with the use of some tones. Let me take a before and after picture for this. This is for Rubber Stamp Madness. See, I have to kind of counterbend this because it's just so dark. It almost becomes like a mirror. Okay. Alright, a couple photos taken. Okay, I think it's time to start applying some of our gel pen dots in here. Highlights, and then I could do the pigment ink application foregrounds first, but I think I'll do that after. Even though sometimes the gel pen can show through that pigment ink, but just so I don't have to avoid the pigment ink, I'm going to the wet pigment and drying pigment ink, I'm just going to do this right now. Okay, so I'll start off with a white gel pen, okay? Now, things are quite subtle in here, so I'm going to apply some of these white gel pen highlights sparingly because there isn't a lot of just white light, you know, throughout the scene, you know, a wash and, you know, white light. So if there's not a lot of that, then I mean, that's really toned out in there, so it's very muted. So, all right, so opposite of shading, highlighting. I'm highlighting the side of the tree, facing the light, and when I'm shading, I'm shading the side of the tree opposite the light, right? This tree over here is darker. You know, it's in a darker area than over here, right? So I use more highlights over here than over here. So you vary your application. So let's take a look at here. See that? A couple little dots here, much more over here. And then just kind of taper it off. You know, you can use more dots kind of closer to the moon, and then as it moves into the shadows, just space out your dots a little bit more, your highlights. Alright, so that cloud down there can also be reflecting some of that light. Silver lining. Every cloud has silver linings, so they say. Tops of the tufts. Okay, now let's take a look down here in the water and add some little just sparkly reflections in the water. This is what kind of brings your water to life, even though these are somewhat subtle because the water is fairly light. They can add a nice kind of a shimmer to your piece. Okay. Alright, so let's add some little highlights down in these grasses as well. I'm adding it where that moonlight would be hitting it, in theory. I say in theory because this is just all it's your world, so it's wherever you want your lighting to be. I can put some of this on some of these little grasses here. It could be, maybe it's dew or something like that, striking some of these grasses. It could be kind of a wet type of foggy environment in here after the sun's gone down. Oops, I put too much there. If you put too much, you just rub it out, it comes right off. They'll dry and they'll stick, but you can always kind of buff them off. So if you're mailing this out, or if it's going to be handled a lot, you definitely want to spray seal. I spray seal anyway, but definitely with things like this, when it comes down to handling of your piece. Okay, so let's go into some additional tones here. Let me see if this is... Oh, this is working here. Good. My Marvy Signo green is one that I really want to use in here. Okay. I don't know if you... Piano practice in the background there. I would do this later, but I have to get this done. So I hope you don't mind a little music. Okay, this is a shuttle art gel pen, and I'm adding green because this is real similar to the types of greens that we've used in here, right? So you can, incorporate that type of color scheme into your highlighting as well. Let me get this flowing here. I don't know if I've used this one yet. You have to kind of get things flowing a bit with some of these. Yeah, this one's not flowing enough for me. Some of these pens, you got to get working and whatnot. I have 180 colors of this in this set, so some of them I just haven't used. And you have to kind of get it kicked off and flowing before it really starts working well for you. But the ink is fairly thin on the shuttle art ones, so they're a little bit more translucent than opaque, which can kind of be nice because the colors underneath the gel show through a little bit more, so it incorporates in with the surrounding more than a pen that's opaque. But if you really want some gel pen highlight to stand out, or gel pen whatever, doesn't have to be a highlight, then use one that's a little bit more opaque, or you'll just have to kind of go over it a little bit more with the ones that are more translucent and see-through. Alright, so you can see this right here. I don't know if you can tell. Yeah, you can tell a little bit. Those green tint, highlights are in there. Pretty subtle in terms of the overall scheme of things, but from a textural standpoint, when I'm looking at this, in person right here, these little things are not an insignificant addition to a piece. They can be quite integral to the overall spirit of a piece, because what they can really do is they can add in a texture that really kind of stands out, and it's adding quite a difference in value. If I put a light dot in a dark area, it stands out quite a bit. Okay, I'm adding more of it because it's going light on dark into my light area. Okay, and let's go back to the white now and use some of this in there so we can vary the value scheme of those highlight addition areas. It's like pointillism or something like that. Quite a lot of dots in here. Okay. Alright, now, I've done fireflies in the past where they're just white, but people that kind of know them, there's a little bit of a greenish glow to them. So I'm going to try the Signo pen right here. Now here's the thing, sometimes when I do this kind of glow, which I'll do around these dots, if I use the shuttle art ones, they're thinner and more translucent, meaning the ink is just thinner in them, so sometimes if I dab over them with a Q-tip, it just removes the ink right away, in which case I can have a little glow there and reapply some of those dots, you know, that represent fireflies later on, but I just assume they, you know, retain their lightness. Okay, let me see if this one's going to go on here. I don't even see this one. All right, this green is not as light as I thought it was. Yeah, I might have to go with the shuttle art ones. Okay, this green is quite dark, actually. I thought it was kind of more of a, like a neon looking pastel, but it's quite dark, so here, I'll add this in some of the darker areas. Alright, so well, let me try this one right here. I don't know if that's really going to show up. It's darker than I thought, or than what I'd want here, but I'll just get it started here. I'll establish where these little glowing little fireflies are going to be. So you just kind of put them in front of objects, and you don't worry about how dark something is or light, okay, because the fireflies represent a light source in the scene, so they can be as bright as they want. You know, you want them to be in the shadows, okay? Okay, so I have them kind of hovering around in these trees right here. Kind of around in these grasses too. Maybe I'll put them in the foreground too. Okay, maybe I'll do the little dot a little bit larger. It's not quite the green I want, but I'll try to vary it a touch. Let's put some out here. If I remember where I put all these dots, some I can't see in some areas. Okay, maybe a little tiny dot in the background. I'm trying to space them out, yet not be so consistent that it's too uniform in terms of the distance between these dots in here. Okay, see, it's kind of random, huh? Kind of, I don't know. Strategic randomness. So maybe I have a new term here. All right, I think I want this kind of this greenish, limey green, though. One thing I haven't tried before is spray sealing everything down before adding that white pigment ink, which might be a good idea. Maybe I'll try that for the first time here on this piece. Okay, so this is adding a little bit of tone to it, so I guess, I don't know, I guess these little fireflies will be a little bit more sophisticated in terms of multi-tone foundations on it. And they don't look like they're glowing, but they will when I apply that pigment ink. Hopefully. Okay, let's take a look here. Sometimes the thing that I don't do often enough is kind of establish a larger kind of pattern in foregrounds for things like this. I should go really big, you know, which would put a firefly right next to our face. Oftentimes you see this type of texture in the sky in the form of stars. If I put stars up there, I don't know, maybe it would be kind of interesting to be like terrestrial stars here, but then they kind of complement the stars in the sky. Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Not in this scene, because I have the moon up there, but... Okay, I want to bring emphasis, so let's go a little bit larger here. I really want this to stand out for that article. Rubber Stamp Madness gel pen article. Okay, now at the heart of all those, let me see if I can apply this without removing that green down there. Let me see if I can put a little white kind of nucleus, not really, but at the center of these, just to make them a little bit lighter. And maybe this gel pen will kind of anchor those little dots down a touch. I don't know. It might even make them come off easier. It's kind of interesting looking, huh? These ones that are kind of lightening up a little bit, they stand out a little bit more. Doesn't that look a little bit more, I don't know, whimsical or kind of your magical night type of thing? Having these little tiny things, it's like putting Christmas lights or something like that up in, you know, free-form Christmas lights hovering about in the night. You can see them a little bit more distinctly. I need to cluster. Some of these are a little bit too far away from each other. Let's put a couple, you know, close to one another. They're kind of hanging out, maybe. Yeah, something like that. Okay, to spray seal or not to spray seal, that is the question. If I do that, then I'm going to have to stamp my foreground objects here first, spray seal it, then apply the inks on top of that, or do I just go for it and just try it on here? I'm inclined to just kind of go on here before spray sealing. I don't know, maybe I'll experiment with that another time, but... Alright, this is a little bit too frayed, I think. Well, let's try it here. Q-tip. White pigment ink. Really blotting a lot of that off. We don't want big, thick blobs of that, but we want just real soft applications of it to get a soft applicator. You have to make your applicator tip soft, so I've already kind of pre-frayed it and loosened it up a bit. And I'm doing very light touches, okay? This is where, if you haven't seen these videos before, this is where everyone kind of goes maybe a little astray with this technique right here. You want it to where when you tap it, you can barely see anything, and through that repetition of movement or tapping, more ink is applied. And when you're doing it very slow like that, you can really see what's happening and control the amount of ink transfer to the paper. You can always dab it off if you add too much, but where I'm adding it is where light meets dark, okay? So on some of the tops of some of these clouds, it's light, and then where it moves up, it gets a little bit darker. That's where it's really the most effective, I find. And this, in a sense, is creating lighting as well, because it is, even though it's translucent and not opaque, we can see this white pigment on there, okay? Around the moon. Look at that. See, this moon right here looks okay as is, but let's add a little bit of this pigment ink around it. Like this, and hopefully we can get it to look like it's glowing in the sky, okay? So see, where I add it down, you can see the image underneath there, but it's just a little bit more translucent and illuminated, I guess you can say, around the object now. What you're saying is that, I mean, there's clouds up there, so you're saying that there's moisture in the air, right? So it stands to reason that there would be this kind of suspended moisture, which is like fog or anything like that, or clouds. And when light hits those areas, it illuminates. So that's what we're doing. We're kind of putting that moisture in the air by doing this. We're saying that there's light hitting these little beads, these microscopic particles of moisture in there. And, you know, moisture, water is reflective. So it's kind of breaking up that form so you get a much more soft and glowing moon this way. Alright, let's put some right around the pond where light meets dark, okay? So here's light, and we'll put a bit of this. Let me switch off here to this other side. This other side is much more frayed. It's almost, you know, ready to get tossed out, but see, I kind of soften up the edge right here, and it kind of puts, and then what you do is you kind of taper it. You put a little bit more in the light, and then as you move away from it, use less taps, softer taps maybe. Isn't that really fun there? It looks a little bit more magical when you have that texture and element within the space, this soft texture, and or fog. It takes on its own spirit, I say, having that bit of fog in there. It's that diffusion. It brings your scene to life. It's saying that there are things between the objects, the space in between, that we're not always aware of. So it's the moisture in the air being illuminated by that moonlight. So it becomes kind of more of a living space than just looking like objects stamped on a piece of paper this way. You can have drama and everything without it, but it just adds that extra little touch. See, like that? And pigment ink is something that everyone has in their repertoire, usually, you know, for embossing and whatnot. Who doesn't have a pigment ink pad? Except, you know, those, you know, maybe really new to stamping. But people usually have it, so it's easy enough to break it out and to use it, perhaps, in a different way than you used it before. But in a way that can be extremely effective. You can even put it around word stamps to lighten some areas of the word. Let's put this deer in a bit of this fog as well. So let's put some at the base of its legs, right? And we can put him in illuminated fog or moisture, in an illuminated, I don't know, it's basically like a little cloud, right? But it incorporates the object. the figure into the scene a little bit more, wouldn't you say? Than just stamping them right on the surface. Now it's behind something. What is it behind? It's just behind a little bit of illuminated fog. Or mist, I guess. Kind of putting some in the background. Sometimes you put it in the background like this, right next to this, and it brings this tree. It pulls the tree forward visually. How does that look? It's different with it, isn't it? It's kind of bringing the piece alive, or making the piece come alive. And isn't that a perfect little environment for these little fireflies? Alright, let's try to do these fireflies now. Okay, I'm going to remove a lot of this ink, because I don't want a big blob around the firefly. I just want a little bit of diffused lighting, so it looks like they're glowing. Okay, so getting the right consistency is the really important thing. Kind of want to watch out that you're not hitting the... Maybe I'm hitting too much of the post here, the stick. Let me put a little bit more cotton in front of it. You never want to be hitting that tip there, because that means that you're tapping too hard. In my case, I just keep using the same Q-tip over and over. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, there's too much on here, and it's uneven. Okay. Let's take a look there. Do you see that kind of glowing little ball of light? That's what I'm going to be doing on these. Alright, this is all uneven here. I need to get switch off. That's driving me nuts. I kind of like using it because it's the ones that I've already used, because I've already kind of frayed the tip a little bit. But that one's all uneven. It probably has some dried pigment ink on it. Okay, so let me try this new one. I have to get this new one that's kind of established here. I gotta start tapping it off, and as I'm tapping... Okay, that's good, I guess. I think. Let's try it. Forgive me if I start working off screen here. I'm gonna try to keep an eye on that. Okay. Maybe I won't do this over all of them, but I'll put it over quite a few. I kind of dab it off like that too. Sometimes it's too much. Maybe I'll put the ones in the foreground. I'll put a little bit more of the glow around it. Okay. Coming alive for sure, huh? It's like putting stars or something like that into the scene. But maybe in an unexpected way. Little bits of light. And I think that thing that I did with the gel pens, I put that Signo pen white over the top of the green. It seems like it sealed it in there. I don't think it doesn't seem to be removing. Although I don't see much of that green anymore. Maybe I'll have to add a little bit more of that in there, but I think this looks okay. Yeah, I think that looks okay, but you know what, though? I'm going to add a little of this green in the middle of them. We're really doing a lot of multi-layering here, just in terms of the smallest of dots in here, but put more of this just green dot just by itself, I think. Not glowing. Maybe it's a firefly that just turned off its light. So it's just not quite as bright, but you know, it's just kind of sitting on, you know, resting. It's resting its little light. Maybe they're kind of sitting on some of these reeds here in the foreground, or the grasses. Okay, now, I think that looks pretty good. I think that's certainly enough. I think we make a point of that, of those fireflies being there. Now, let's add some foreground to the piece. And let's do it with a nice dark ink that's going to stand out from the background quite a bit, which will be VersaFine ink. Oh, need to pause. Okay, today is a tough one for stamping. I keep getting distracted and whatnot, but it's okay. Sometimes you come back to your piece and you look at it with somewhat fresh eyes. Sometimes other things reveal themselves to you that you don't see while you're working on them, and that can be good. The only thing I like kind of working in you know, when the inks are a little bit more wet, so I can kind of gauge just how saturated my tones are going to be when I spray it. But that's alright. Let's just see about some additional foreground. Okay, so we're going for some very thick impressions and deep and dark. Alright, my tack and peel is getting less tacky. I need to wash them off. I haven't taken the time to do that. I don't want this falling off on my piece. These get less tacky, but all you have to do is rinse them off. You can even scour them pretty good, and they get just as tacky as they were. Tack and peel is a surface that you put on your acrylic blocks for the temporary mounting of bare rubber stamps, and is quite a fantastic material if you do use unmounted stamps and with your acrylic blocks. Unmounted rubber, that is to say. Alright, doesn't that look fantastic? In terms of the kind of the real deep saturation of ink. And you can use as much or as little of these overhangs as you want. such is the spirit in which they were designed. Kind of want a little bit of a drippier one, kind of a curtain of leaves kind of hanging down with gravity, maybe. The other one was the leaves, and this one is called hanging leaves, just for lack of a better term or title. Okay. I think that looks about right. But it really frames the top of the scene off, doesn't it? And look at that against that moon. Isn't that dramatic? Now those trees really stand... the leaves really stand out from the trees because the trees they've dried a little bit more dull. But those will get darker. But I do like the distance that this kind of a change in value provides from having a little bit of a drier paper. Okay, so let's get the bottom portion of this. I did stamp my reeds down here already in dye-based ink, okay? The dye-based ink is pretty black as far as blacks go, as far as dye-based black ink goes, okay? Marvy's just about as dark as I've seen. I don't know. Memories, I think, were a little bit darker, but it was also thicker. And for me, I had to wait for it to dry. So as far as a, relatively quick drying black, Marvy's pretty good. And it will get darker when I spray it. But this is quite a bit darker, so let's lay some of this down. And this is one of those situations where now we'll have some things in front of some of these little fireflies, which is good. So the fireflies aren't all just on the surface. I mean, it wouldn't even be bad to restamp some of these reeds so that some of those reeds are sandwiched, or the fireflies are sandwiched in between some of those reeds, which should be cool. I'm changing my angle with each impression a little bit and changing the height that I stamp it so that it becomes more of a, I don't know, so-called natural looking layering of form down there. And it provides quite a bit of compositional framing as well. Look at that. And can you see the difference in value between one and the next? Look how it stands up against those lights, and see those kind of sandwiched fireflies in between some of those reeds. Doesn't that kind of make it look a little bit more dimensional that way? Going on the top surface up here. Counter bending. It's really bowing. Alright, I'm going to take my advice, I think, and let's go for those reeds here again. Let me just get a couple more. This one I'm not going to do in, I'm just going to go for the Marvy Black again here, and I want some reeds in front of some of these, or a couple of these fireflies over here, I think. Something like that. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. So they're not just, everything's not just, the lights aren't all just right up front. And I think that looks a little bit better. It looks a little bit more full. So I've never done this before. Kind of gone back in and stamped over things like fireflies, like this. But you always kind of, always learning. But I think that looks pretty good right back in there now. It kind of bisects some of the little balls here. I didn't bisect too many of them, like one. Okay, but there it kind of breaks up the monotony. And here's these other reeds in here, and maybe another one right in there, I think. Fine-tuned adjustments, I think. Yeah, not too bad. I like the layering aspect of things. Okay, there we go. Trying to cut off the glare here. So anyways, that is a really good example of kind of the things that gel pens can provide. The ability to add light into dark in exact locations within the piece for the effect that you want them to lend themselves to. So in this case, I mean, it is fireflies and they do represent an object, but from a visual sense, this area down here becomes a little bit muddled, okay, in terms of the darkness, okay? I do believe I have some pretty rich colors down here, and they'll come out a little bit more when I spray seal these, but those little lights down there really provide something interesting in the form of texture, in that they're kind of glowing, soft glowing light against really crisp impressions, okay? So it provides that type of textural contrast. And it provides contrast in terms of light and dark. So it gives us an excuse to have a little bit of lighting down there back into those areas that are otherwise really dark with kind of deep set shadows and whatnot. So they really provide a nice texture too, going throughout the different forms from foreground to background. Which lends itself to a certain type of continuity through the piece. So they do all kinds of things like that. Do we need them in there? You know, we don't need them, but I think it really kind of, I don't know, it really changes the spirit, and I think it looks a little more full in terms of a rich visual statement. I don't always do them, though. I might put more dots in terms of representing things like highlights and specular light on the water or something of that sort. So, but I don't know, these little suspended little lights like that in the form of fireflies or representing fireflies sure are fun. Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed the scene. I'm kind of trying to hold off the glare here, but thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you like this video, maybe like, share, and subscribe.